Pitch by Jason Bradford. Chapter 4. Ginger Snaps. Late afternoon arrived by way of the bright golden arms of the sun's majestic beams. Michael J. Fox was still asleep on the arm of the couch. Jack opened his front door, took a breath for good measure, and stepped outside. He urged Karen to follow. She was slow and hesitant, but she did eventually join him in the open daylight for everyone to see. Jack closed the door behind Karen, and the two of them walked down the sidewalk. A jogger in blue sweatpants and a matching top locked her gaze of disbelief onto Karen, and she tripped over the curb and fell into the grass, rolling twice before getting up. Jack and Karen moved on, but the jogger stood, cemented in her spot, watching in wonderment. Further up the road, a couple of young kids stopped them and bombarded them with questions. "A werewolf! In the daytime!" the first kid quipped. "I thought you turned human in the daytime," the second kid asked, as he circled Karen before continuing. "And only a werewolf in a full moon night." He never took his eyes off her. "You watch too many movies. You should try reading a book on the subject," Jack responded. In real life, a werewolf is born a werewolf and stays a werewolf until it dies or is killed, which can only be achieved in one of two ways: starvation or another way that's too terrible to tell you about. Regardless, once a werewolf, you never turn human again. Karen nodded to confirm Jack's statement as factual. Karen had thought about it. Werewolves and humans had always been able to communicate during days before weapons and massive war pummeled the earth. While humans didn't take interacting with werewolves as a natural behavior, under the right circumstances, that communication was there. A nod for yes, a side-to-side shake for no, a wink, a handshake, a hug. Many ways to communicate without actually speaking had always been practiced. "Wow, that's so cool," the second kid remarked. Jack and Karen continued. By the time they made it to their destination, a small crowd had gathered behind them, amazed at seeing a werewolf in their town. As they walked into the coffee shop, Karen realized how aggressive her first impression must have been to Jack. After all, shredding one's friend to a pulp wasn't a form of friendly salutation. She needed to find a way to let him know that her actions had context. It wasn't to fill a hungry belly. It was something much more. She hadn't actually eaten any of Jack's friends, as Jack may have thought. She hoped she could let him know that she only savaged Tyler and fucked him up without digesting any of the human. Werewolves don't eat humans unless it's in self-defense of themselves, a pack member, desperation, or to save another human from the act of violence. Yes, a werewolf had always acted as judge, jury, and executioner in the heated moment. If the hair was raised on the nape, then most likely the human was in danger of becoming the lamb for the lion and would be dealt with viciously. However, the main interaction between humans and lycanthropes had always been peaceful and coexisting without exploitation or ill will from either party. Werewolves had, at one time, been a natural protector of the human race. But as the packs died down and the werewolves became more scarce, the ability to protect became more of a matter of retreating into the shadows to hide from the extinction that their presence threatened them with. That was why she had been watching from the shadows in the forest behind Jack's house, why she had studied him and Tyler. She had to seek solutions to the problems her kind had been facing, and she knew that what she had done the night before would set off a chain of events that she needed to put werewolves back into the natural order. She should have bitten into Jack last night as well, but when he freed her and she looked into his eyes, she felt a strange connection that took her by surprise, an unexpected bond. That realization of these immediate feelings welled in her quickly, and the intrigue replaced her intent. By the time she reconsidered her plan, midnight had already passed. Now she'd have to wait until the next full moon to get back on track to see her plan through. But that feeling of belonging beside the human man was still a lingering mystery. Anyway, in the meantime, Karen decided to act a little less aggressive and more compatible with humans. That would be a good idea if Jack wanted to incorporate her with the townsfolk. They hadn't seen a werewolf in nearly 30 years or more, she assumed. Some had never seen one and had only heard stories of them, making them seem like a fairy tale or a monster from a movie. She knew she'd be a spectacle. Would they like her? Fear her? She was nervous at the answer that waited, but at the same time she was filled with excitement at the idea of letting the humans know her kind wasn't fully extinct yet. Her tail wagged with great force from side to side from the increasing happiness. She would be friendly and show no aggression. Inside the coffee shop, upon their entrance through the door, the sound of dishes breaking filled the space, and the startled scream of shock rang out. It was a young girl about 20 years old, a waitress, shocked at the monstrous-looking blonde-haired werewolf coming in. She composed herself and smiled awkwardly to show an apologetic grin at her involuntary behavior. The young waitress cleared her mess quickly and made her way to the booth. The table had been broken from the post and pushed against the wall to make room for Karen to sit behind it. Jack was across from her. "I'm so sorry about the damage," Jack told her. The name tag revealed Star as a waitress's name. "No trouble." Star stared down at Karen and smiled. "I'm sorry to stare. It's just that my parents told me werewolves were nowhere around these parts, maybe even extinct." Karen looked up at the young girl. She knew everyone in the diner was staring at her, but felt more honored than uncomfortable. Star continued, "May I feel your fur?" Karen held her large clawed hand up for Star, and Star accepted it and stroked it a few times. A look of amazement appeared on her face. "I never would have guessed it would be so soft. And we're both blonde. How cool is that?" She paused a moment. "I'm sorry, I got lost in the moment. What can I get you two?" "I'll have a large black coffee and a large bowl of milk for her," Jack replied. Star nodded and left them alone. Jack's cell phone alerted him of a message. He pulled it from his pant pocket and looked down at it. It was a text message from Ginger. He rolled his eyes, put his phone on silent, and shoved it back in his pocket. Star returned with her order a moment later. Jack sipped his coffee. Karen lapped her milk. The cafe door opened and Courtney walked in with her mother. Jack was happy to see his pupil. They made eye contact, and without an exchange of words or other communication, Courtney and her mother made their way to Jack and Karen. "Wow," Courtney said. "A werewolf!" Courtney's mother, Marilyn, looked surprised and was at a loss for words. "Please, sit down," Jack motioned for them to sit. Marilyn sat beside Jack, and Courtney took what small cushion was left and pressed against Karen. She stared up at her in awe and wonder. "I thought werewolves were extinct," Marilyn said without taking her eyes off Karen. The glow of a child still staring at colorfully wrapped presents piqued with curiosity, and magic was in her eyes. "Are you worried about having her out in public like this?" Jack was warm in his answer. "I considered very strongly about it, but now it's certain that werewolves aren't extinct, only endangered." Courtney continued to look up at Karen. Her neck twisted as far left as it would go. Karen looked down at the child. The sides of Karen's snout raised and twitched in a faux snarl, revealing her sharp teeth. Karen licked the child's cheek. "Which means, under Public Act 451, people are not allowed to take or harm any endangered wildlife." Jack smiled. "She's her own independent self, protected and as free as you and me." Star returned and took the orders of Marilyn and Courtney. While they waited for their orders to be filled, Courtney suggested that after lunch, Jack take Karen to see The Howling, which was playing at the Majestic Theater. She giggled at the thought of how ironic it would be to take a werewolf to see such an iconic 80s horror masterpiece, and the thought of her sister Sue, who worked there, being taken off guard by Karen, also made Courtney laugh at the expression on her sister's face as she imagined it. "I don't think that's a good idea," Jack offered. "I don't want to acclimate her too much too fast." Karen looked at Jack and tilted her head at his statement. "So you want to go?" Jack asked her. Karen nodded her head to indicate the answer was yes. So Jack thought, "You can definitely communicate with simple gestures and body language." "Tell me no," Jack requested. Karen nodded her head from side to side in the no gesture. Jack laughed and looked at Courtney, who was now staring at him as if waiting for confirmation. "Would you like to join us?" he asked Marilyn and Courtney. "Oh, no," answered Marilyn. "We're going to get home. Courtney has housework to do, and her father will be getting up for his late night shift soon. They like to watch True Blood before he leaves for work." "I understand," Jack said. The four of them finished eating lunch and chatted for a while. The afternoon was waning, and True Blood would be playing on Courtney's television in less than an hour. Marilyn and Courtney paid and left alongside Jack and Karen. The four of them walked out of the front door and went in two different directions. Marilyn and Courtney got in their vehicle and drove off, as Jack and Karen walked down the sidewalk in the opposite direction toward the theater. A few of the diners left at the cafe at the same time and continued to follow behind the werewolf and her human. They were never too far behind the new town celebrity. As the sun was beginning to set, the town took on a Norman Rockwell painting kind of appearance. Violet and soft blue hues painted the town, and the sky became the paint that time used to stroke upon everything in sight. The Majestic Theater lay just ahead. The Howling was waiting. Jack and Karen continued to walk down the street. Karen's tail swished back and forth. The patrons that had followed out of the cafe had merged into the small crowd that had been waiting outside and watching through the windows. They all continued to walk down the street, staying close behind. Courtney's sister Sue was working the ticket booth, and she screamed in horror when she first saw Karen. "It's okay, Sue," Jack told the teenager. "She won't hurt you." Jack was familiar with Sue. "I'm sorry, Mr. Naughton. I just didn't expect to ever see a living, breathing lycanthrope," Sue responded. Sue felt embarrassed by her composure. She was sure the regret was written on her face. "Believe me," Jack responded. "I get it." Jack and Karen entered the theater and obtained a large tub of popcorn, a large soft drink for Jack, and a large water for Karen. Sue continued selling tickets to the dozens of folks that had followed the couple into the theater because they were enthralled by Karen and wanted to be a part of her evening, to know her, and to be able to brag to their families, friends, and neighbors that they knew the werewolf and went to see a movie with her. The howling sold out within moments. After the tickets were all sold, Sue also took a seat in the theater. She, like the crowd, wanted to be a part of the Karen craze. The movie theater was silent. Jack and Karen watched the movie. The entire audience watched Jack and Karen watch the movie. On the screen, Belinda Belaski had a beige desk phone receiver wedged between her ear and her shoulder as she was thumbing through a filing cabinet in a dated doctor's office. Out of nowhere, a large monstrous hand reached out of the frame and removed the folder from her hand. Belinda was walloped on the side of her head and knocked to the ground by the hairy creature. Jack was aware that Karen was uncomfortable with the portrayal of the werewolf within the movie, but he was also enthralled to see her fascinated by it. He reached into the popcorn bowl, only to find it empty. Karen turned to Jack. Her fur was matted with buttered popcorn kernels. She raised her snout and bared her teeth. "Did she just smile at me?" Jack wondered, as he picked a piece of popcorn from her fur and ate it before smiling back at her. Karen turned back to the big screen. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a cell phone. 26 missed calls was sprawled across his screen. He opened his call log. All but one call was from Ginger. The other call was from his brother Phil. That one call surprised him more than the combined 26 stalker calls from the crazy Ginger. What could Phil be calling about? On screen, Belinda Belaski was getting her throat torn out by the powerful jaws and razor-sharp canines of a werewolf named Eddie. Belinda's character was kicking her feet ferociously at the beginning of the attack, but they soon became still and dangled lifelessly as Werewolf Eddie continued to devour her. Across town, a 2-story brick apartment building stood, tucked behind a few houses and just beyond a field of wildflowers. The sun had set and the darkness was thick. From a second-floor window, bright yellow lights flickered inside the small apartment within the building. Ginger stood before her closet door. Beyond the door was a large space, a walk-in closet nearly as big as her cramped, candlelit bedroom. She hesitated a moment. She closed her eyes and inhaled aggressively, trying to calm herself. "Smell the flowers, blow out the candles," she continued her breathing. In through her nose, out through her mouth. "Smell the flower." Ginger opened her eyes. "Fuck the flowers." Ginger burst the closet door open away from her. Bright orange and yellow dancing light poured from the closet. The candles burning within were twice as bright as those in her bedroom behind her. Ginger stepped into her closet. Before her, on the wall, photos of Jack were hanging, with a variation of Scotch tape, thumbtacks, and small nails. Large photos, small photos, photos of Jack alone, and photos of Jack with Ginger. There were even a few of Jack standing in his classroom teaching his children. Ginger had been spying one afternoon and took a picture through his classroom window, and now that image was hanging with hundreds of other photos of Jack. A small nightstand sat against the wall before her, melting candles sitting upon it. The hot wax reached beyond the body of the candle that produced it, swirling onto the nightstand and finding its way, trying to escape the table, but frozen forever in multicolored wax fingers, stretching out for freedom, but hardening before that freedom was realized. Ginger looked in the mirror in the center of the stand. Her reflection gazed back. Her makeup was a black, streaky mess upon her face. Her fire engine red hair was unkempt. She wore a thin white blouse, and she could see her black bra beneath the sheer fabric. She looked back at herself, startled at the woman in the glass. What the hell happened to you?" Ginger asked her reflection. "Jack happened," her reflection responded. "You know it's always Jack." Ginger was startled at the realization that her reflection was talking to her, with answers to the riddles Ginger posed. She reached out and touched her reflection. Mirror Ginger looked angry. The real Ginger cried again. "Stop the fucking crying," Mirror Ginger insisted. "You're always crying." Ginger stopped suddenly, shocked by the sting of the verbal slap Mirror Ginger had thrown at her. "You know I'm right," Mirror Ginger continued. But I love him, Ginger told Mirror Ginger, who was looking back at her. I need him to love me and be with me. I can't live without Jack. Then do it. It's time. Mirror Ginger looked down at the small table before her in the mirror's reflection. Go on and do it. We can all be together that way. You know, I've never done you wrong. Ginger knew what she meant. It was a guaranteed way that would make Jack love her and spend forever with her. Ginger opened the small drawer of the nightstand. A .38 special sat there as if waiting to be called on. Ginger grabbed it and quickly placed it in the front pocket of her short black leather skirt that she was wearing. Ginger pulled an envelope from the drawer and a writing pen and scribbled a note. What I'm going to do can't be undone, and where I'm going, I can never return from. For this, I'm sorry. She placed the pen back in the drawer and slid it closed, blew out the candles in the closet, and looked at her reflection in the dark, barely able to see Mirror Ginger. You still there? Ginger asked the mirror. It was silent. A long pause. Are you sure I need to kill him? She added. She continued looking in the mirror. Her reflection was silent and moved with her. They were one again. Ginger stared at her streaked makeup, and she could feel her anxiety and her anger rise again. Finally, Mirror Ginger spoke. Yes. After the feature ended, Jack and Karen spontaneously jumped into the small photo booth to have their pictures taken as a way to recall their first night out on the town. Jack briefly considered this a first date before shaking off the absurdity of a human and a werewolf being in a committed relationship. Where the hell did that thought even come from? The booth was small, and the crowd of the Karen craze fans watched from the outside the blue velvet curtains. Karen's huge hind legs protruded from the curtains, exposing her hocks for everyone to gawk at. Her tail was also exposed and wagging excitedly. Flash, flash, flash. The photos were taken in quick succession. In the various poses, Jack made silly faces, but only Karen's chest was visible in all but one. In the last photo, she was able to bend and flex her way down so her mouth met Jack's, and in that last photo, they had forever captured the image of their very first kiss. Their walk home was quiet, even with a dozen followers who were enamored at the fact a werewolf inhabited their little town. They held hands. Karen's hands were huge and swallowed Jack's human hand. She towered over him as they walked side by side. Her tail wagged left, right, swoop, swoop. It was just the two of them and the Karen craze. Jack's house was dark. Ginger sat out front, across the street, staring at his house from her pink Jeep. Michael J. Fox was there in the large living room window. She wondered if she should kill him, too. Jack might be mad being together in the afterworld if he didn't have his cat. Ginger decided she would kill Michael J. Fox as well. Her anger rose to new heights as she peered into the house. His car was there, but the house was empty, and there had been no answer at the door when she knocked. She contemplated the situation, and her anger increased. Smell the flowers, blow out the candles, she thought. It did no good. The flowers in her mind were wildflowers, and she was allergic to them. She pulled her Jeep out of sight down the road. She found a quiet and dark spot that gave her entry to the woods. She pulled her Jeep into an opening in the trees wide enough to grant her access. She reached down to her right thigh and, through her skirt, could feel the gun. She left the Jeep, took the keys, and walked on foot down the path toward Jack's house. Jack pulled his phone from his pocket and showed it to Karen. She's called me so many times, I think I need to tell you about Ginger. Jack opened his phone and swiped through a few photos before finding one of Ginger. He held it way up as far as his arm could reach so that Karen could see Ginger's photo. She just won't stop. She refuses to believe that we're done. Karen growled low and silently, so the crowd behind them could not hear her, but Jack did. As they approached Jack's house, Jack knew the crowd was going to swarm his yard and hang out. He wondered if it would be all night. He turned toward the crowd. Hey, everyone. It's been great having you all join us today, but would you mind if perhaps you left us for the night? Maybe we can do it again soon. Several of the followers offered their understanding and nodded, said goodnight to Karen and Jack, and turned and left. However, a few others in the crowd were too excited to offer any respect or understanding of the limits being observed. They followed Jack and Karen as the two stepped into Jack's yard. Jack was slightly annoyed, but let it go. He knew it was a big deal and admitted to himself that he'd too be excited as well. He only hoped the excitement of something new and unknown, like Karen being in a drab, uneventful little town like this one, would simmer down. Jack whispered to Karen as they climbed the 3 steps to his lemonade porch. Get comfortable in the living room. I'll head to the kitchen and cook us up some steaks and chicken. I'll keep yours on the raw side. He smiled at her. From the tree line, Ginger emerged from the woods. Jack's silent and dark house loomed at her. She approached silently. The back door was not locked, just as she expected it wouldn't be. It slid quietly on its track. The front door opened quietly. Karen entered the dark house and disappeared into the shadows. Jack turned to wave at the small crowd. Sue was still there, watching in awe and waving back. Jack closed the door with a soft thump. Ginger walked away from the sliding glass door quickly when she heard Jack coming through the front door. She darted through the shadows that darkened the familiar layout of Jack's house. She felt for her 38 special once more before disappearing behind the basement door. She would wait for the right moment. Jack entered the kitchen and turned the lights on. The brightness washed over him and stung his eyes for a moment. He blinked a few times and his eyes adjusted. He hadn't realized until now how much time he spent in the dark this evening. The pots and pans clanked and rattled against each other. A large skillet crashed upon the gas stovetop. Jack turned the burner on, and the orange flame reached out and caressed the bottom of the stainless steel skillet. Jack retrieved a stick of butter and dropped it in the pan. The sizzle was instant, and Jack felt the pang of hunger meeting the expectation of satisfaction. He stood over the pan and watched the butter liquefy and spread throughout the pan. The large strip of steak landed in the pan and sizzled. Jack tossed the white paper butter wrapper in the trash and returned to the stove. Above the stove, the stainless steel hood beamed a flicker of movement from behind him. He could see in the reflection that it was Ginger. Jack slowly turned around. Ginger was approaching slowly until she reached the kitchen island that stood between them. She stopped and raised her right arm. She was pointing the gun at him. "I'll keep it quick," she quipped in a defeated tone. "Ginger, don't do this." Jack raised his hands. He was relieved when he saw Karen enter from behind Ginger in the back of the kitchen. Karen was silent. Her stalking predatory skills were on full display. She slowly approached Ginger, her snout raised in silent, angry snarl. She would be certain not to alert Ginger. Karen's razor claws were spread and ready for the kill. Jack watched in dread and relief as Karen closed in on Ginger. "Turn around," was all he could mutter to Ginger as he gazed into her wide, crazed eyes. "I'm not falling for that," she yelled. "Now, heart or head? Where am I putting your bullet?" She held the gun out as far as her arm would allow. Karen slowly stood to her full massive potential. Saliva dripped from her jaws. Jack broke his gaze with Ginger and averted his stare to Karen. The change in attention interested Ginger enough for her to look behind her, only to be confronted by Karen. Ginger's eyes widened in horror and disbelief at what stood before her. Karen grabbed Ginger with both clawed hands, a vice-like grip, and raised Ginger from the ground. Ginger kicked her feet as they were lifted from the hardwood floor of the kitchen. Ginger dropped the gun when she raised it to fire, as her hands were trembling from fear too severely to grip the handle. She continued to lash out and pounded Karen on the chest and face with her fists as she was being pulled closer, closer to that hungry mouth filled with monstrous teeth, large and sharp, ready to shred and chew. Having never killed a human before, Karen was uncertain how she should do it. She recalled the movie they had watched earlier in the evening when Werewolf Eddie ripped the throat out of Terry. That must be how it's done, if that's how the movies say it must be done. Karen's jaws met with Ginger's throat and pierced it with no effort. Blood spurted and poured down Ginger's thin white blouse before covering her completely and dripping onto the wooden floor. Ginger's kicking slowed before finally stopping altogether. Her gaze became expressionless as she was consumed by death and silenced forever. Karen felt a sense of success as her outcome was indeed like that from the scene in The Howling. Movies are a smart source for reference, Karen thought. Who knew? Jack's blood left his face and he felt flushed and hot. He could feel the fevered frenzy of shock set in. Bitter flavors of butter popcorn swirled about in his belly, and the flavor reached the back of his throat, with that hint taste of stomach acid that always accompanied the promise of losing your last meal. But Jack stood there and watched, unable to look away no matter how much he screamed inside his head to look away. Karen dropped Ginger off on the island in the center of the kitchen. Ginger's corpse offered no more resistance than that of a child's torn rag doll. The sound of Ginger's body meeting the marble top of the island was soft but wet. The black-clawed tips of both of Karen's powerful, hairy hands, knuckle against knuckle, found their way into Ginger's chest. As if trying to pry open a rusted, locked antique chest, Karen pried Ginger's chest open, cracking through the sternum, shattering ribs and tearing muscle like it weren't there. Ginger's still heart lay exposed, sitting upon a mess of mutilated human tissue, now covered in blood and gore. Her intestines and other organs were exposed, but it was the heart that Karen removed, tearing it from its cavity with a sickening wet sound. Karen impaled the heart onto one of her razor-sharp claws and raised it to her mouth. Her teeth sliced through the red, bloody muscle like it were an overripe peach. Karen replaced the other half of the heart back in Ginger's chest, shoving it deep under her rib cage. Karen looked at Jack, not sure how he would react to what she had just done. Jack stared at the carnage in horror. His mouth fought for the words, but his imagination had no trouble coming up with a million of them. His mind screamed in terror and panic. He focused on the gun that lay on his floor. Ginger was going to kill him. He gazed into Karen's bright green eyes. There was that feeling of peace and comfort washing over him again. His mind found silence as the chaos in his head faded, and his mouth finally found the words that were lost to him. He looked down at the mangled Ginger laying on his kitchen island. "I'm out of Clorox." A short time later, it was decided that Ginger's body would be taken into the woods and left in a secure spot. Jack knew there were more monsters out there that would take care of her corpse as they had done with Tyler. He only hoped that he and Karen wouldn't come face to face with them. Jack went to the front of the house and slid his curtains back, away from his window. Michael J. Fox was still lying there, lazy and content. It briefly amazed Jack that his cat witnessed one of the most terrifying moments in Jack's life and only offered to keep the window ledge warm. A chill ran through Jack as he considered the fact that the most terrifying moments had been happening a lot this week. A small crowd was still camped out in Jack's front yard, watching the house. "What the fuck are they waiting for?" Jack cursed in frustration. Karen came up behind him, careful not to expose herself to the onlookers. Her blonde fur was matted, once again, with the crimson gore from her most recent kill. Jack stepped out onto his front lawn. "Please, everyone go," Jack insisted. "I've asked you nicely once already. Don't make me call the cops." The 5 people stepped off the Jack yard into the street. Sue was still present. "Sue, please, go home to your family. There's nothing more to see tonight. I'm calling the police," Jack bluffed. "What law is being broken?" one of the men in the crowd asked. "The street is public." Jack could feel the panic rise. A dead body was lying in pieces in his home, and he had to get rid of it without anyone seeing it. How would he do that when there were half a dozen obsessed fans of Karen watching their every move? Jack was met with instant surprise and confusion. The stubborn fans in the street panicked. They swatted at something above them. A couple of them screamed in horror. "It's a bat!" Sue screamed as she ran down the street, away from the house. Jack looked above their heads, and in the glow of the sodium vapor streetlights, a bat danced in dizzying circles, lunging down, flitting back up and down again. Everyone took off running down the street, and the bat disappeared with them as if chasing them away. Jack was flabbergasted. What just happened? He stood there, alone in the silence, in the shroud of the darkness that the night offered. A sound startled him. Appearing before his face out of nowhere was the bat. He hadn't seen it return. The bat flew clumsily around Jack in obnoxious circles before stopping in front of his face and floating in stillness. Jack thought back to the bat in the woods when Tyler was killed. Could this be the same strange little bat? The bat continued to float before Jack. "Don't just stand there staring at me," the bat insisted. "You have a body in your kitchen and you need to get rid of it. Get to it, Jack."